Good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore with another of our virtual events. And we're here with two wonderful writers who have fantastic new books out. First is Jillian Cantor, who has a new book out called Half-Life, right? I have the paperback copy right here. And she signed a batch of the hardcovers, which should be arriving any moment here at the bookstore. And then we have Nuala O'Connor, who has a brand new book out called Nora, about Nora Barnacle, James Joyce's wife. Absolutely fantastic book. And both of these are really, as I said, I had the honor of doing this event kind of at the last minute. And I'm so pleased that I get to do it because both of these books were such amazing, engaging, and original works. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing you talk about them. And I understand you'll be chatting back and forth a little bit, but there are quite a few through lines between both of your books, I found, maybe in unanticipated ways. Both books deal with the complexities and the sacrifices that come with genius, with love, with art, with social status. There's a lot going on in these books. And so I'll be largely lurking in the background, at least for the first part of this, but I think I'm going to pop up and ask you both some questions. And for those of you watching on Facebook, I'll be monitoring the comments as they come in. So please send your questions in the comments field, and I'll be happy to ask them. So I'm going to turn it over to the two of you for the moment.
Thanks so much, Patrick. I'm going to talk to Jillian first because Jillian's book is fresh off the press. It was published on Tuesday by Harper Perennial. Congratulations, Jillian.
Thank you.
And Half-Life is about Polish-French scientist Marie Curie. And Jillian, you've used this parallel structure where we have Marie's life in Paris, the life we may know a little about, but then we have her alternate self, Maria, who stayed behind in Poland, essentially. And it's a novel about being at a crossroads. It's about the crush of the patriarchy. It's about committing to the project of life. But I'd love to know, as a writer, I'm always fascinated with structure. So could you talk to me about maybe the first spark of Half-Life? You have a lovely story about a man and a statue and how the novel grew from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for having us, Patrick. I think a few years ago, I got to launch in person at Poison Pen. So it's lovely that we can all still connect even in this crazy time. So Half-Life, I've been describing it as sort of Marie Curie meets sliding doors because you get to see the real Marie Curie's life and story, but side by side is also the story of Maria, who I imagine could have been the woman she became if she had made one different choice in her early 20s. And when I first got the idea to write a novel about Marie Curie, I actually thought that I was going to write sort of a straight biographical fiction novel, much like your novel, Nuala. So I want to ask you about that. But I think I wrote about 50 pages and I sent it to my agent. And she said something along the lines of, this is fine, but it doesn't really feel like a book you would write. And I realized that she was right. I tend to sort of gravitate towards the what if story. I have another novel about Anne Frank's sister, Margot, and what if she had lived and had seen what had happened with her sister's fame. And I always sort of fall in that space. So I thought about it a little bit. I decided I was going to start over again. And I started writing a novel about Marie's oldest daughter, Eve, who I was really drawn to because she became a writer. And I think I had about 75 pages of that version. That was also called Half-Life. It was always called Half-Life. And it still wasn't feeling right to me. And I kept thinking about this one thing that I had read about Marie. And that was that she was engaged as a young woman in Poland. And then the man's mother made him break it off because he said that she wasn't good enough for him, which, like, imagine that. She's a future Marie Curie. I know, you know, it was a social class thing at the time, but I just couldn't get that out of my head. That and the fact that I read later in life, and this is what you asked me about with the statue. After she died, there was a statue erected of her in front of her institute in Poland. And I read that he used to go sit there every day and eat his lunch and stare at the statue. And so I kept thinking, I have to find a way to get this into the story. And finally, I realized, wait a minute, this is the story. What if she had married him? And that's when I started over for the third time. And it's the half-life that it became today. So I decided to do Maria's life if she had married this man, and you get to sort of see from when she's in her 20s until when she died, and then Marie's life, moving to Paris, going to Sorbonne, meeting Pierre, and discovering radium. And so I got that what if angle into the book that I sort of always get. And I think, like, in that vein, Nuala, I'm really interested in how you wrote Nora, because Nora is a sort of straight biographical historical fiction of Nora Barnacle's life. And what I loved about your book is that I felt that it was paced so well. I was like turning the pages and very riveted by this very real story. And that's what I think I was struggling with as a writer, trying to write Marie's story, just the straight biographical way. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how you did that.
Yeah, I guess that's the trouble with biographical fiction in a way, isn't it? That a life is not a story. Like, we don't have story-like stories to our lives. We have, you know, troubles, and all fiction is about people who are in flux, essentially, and going through difficult times. And the novelist looks at how that they manage those things and how they solve these things for good or for bad. And so I'm presented with a life, two lives, because James Joyce looms large also.
Yeah.
And I have to make something story-like out of it. I suppose the idea came to me because I was studying Italian by night, and I had to write an essay about Joyce, but I was all the time squinting over his shoulder to see, what is Nora doing over there? I'm much more interested in her. I had read Brenda Maddox's biography of Nora in my late teens, so I dug that out and started reading it again. And I did what I often do when my interest is piqued. I wrote something short first. So my Emily Dickinson novel grew out of a poem I wrote about Emily, and this one grew out of a short story. So I wrote a short story about Joyce and Nora's fateful meeting in June 1904, and I took them as far as 5 months later when they eloped together. And then the story did well. It was published in Granta and it won a prize, but I just couldn't leave Nora behind. My communion with her was not over. And so I just wrote on and on and on. And then, of course, the research becomes a much larger project, and for me, an incredibly enjoyable project. Though Hilary Mantel says that novelists shouldn't call themselves researchers because we're not really interested in facts. We're interested in information more so, you know. And we're interested in questioning the facts. You know, it's like when you saw Casimir sitting there forlornly, to my mind, eating his lunch, looking at the statue and whatever, you started asking yourself questions, and I'm the same. I look at what's on the record and I start to poke at it, because, you know, research for us has already been filtered, right? It's from history books, it's from biographies, and we have to look and think to ourselves, okay, what filter has been put here, and do I agree or do I not agree, and where am I going to bring this, you know, and what am I going to say about the interiority of these people? Because we're more about the feelings than the facts, I think, as biofiction writers.
Yeah. You know, I agree with that. And I think that's what initially drew me to Marie's story. You know, I always knew that she had discovered radium and she won a Nobel Prize, and sort of knew these large facts about her. But I had initially, I read a piece about her personal life, and that's what sort of drew me in, thinking about, you know, she had a lot of tragedy in her personal life and a lot of struggle that she had to overcome to be able to achieve these things. And when I started sort of thought about her everyday life and what it was like for her as a woman and a mother and a wife, that's what I got interested in writing about and imagining, I think.
Yeah, it's like when you start to do the digging, that I find anyway, because, and I usually write about women, the women become 20 times more interesting to me than they ever were.
Yeah.
And it's almost like falling in love. And, you know, I live in a place where I don't know a lot of people. So my husband has to be my sounding board. He has to listen to me get excited about these characters. I'm sure you brought Marie Curie to many a dinner in your home.
My whole family had to listen. Yeah, my kids too.
Same here. Yeah, I have 3 kids as well. And so you start getting mad excited and bringing all this info, you know, to your sounding board and saying, oh, you won't believe this. I found this piece of information. And then I think it's that excitement that then propels you forward. And then, of course, you have to find a structure. So I'm really interested in your structure. I've written a novel before that was a dual narrative, and it's, you know, it's such an enjoyable thing to do because you almost give yourself a break when you switch from one voice to the other voice. So I'm just wondering why, in a sense, the dual narrative felt crucial to your process. And you've already touched on the fact that this is like a thing that you do. You look at the untold part.
Yeah, I mean, in this story especially, you know, I felt like it had to be told this way. If I was going to examine these two women's lives side by side, then I felt that they truly had to be side by side. So you would see what they were each doing in each year. And one of the best things about writing this, and also definitely the most challenging, was the fact that both storylines have all the same characters, but they're slightly different people depending on this one choice that she makes. So I had to sort of keep track of who everyone was and in which storyline they were, because, you know, Pierre plays a big part in both, but he's not the same Pierre Curie in the storyline where he doesn't marry Marie. So it was sort of like keeping track of that. And, you know, as I was planning out the first draft, I made a big timeline, which I don't normally outline. I keep saying I outlined this book, but I guess it wasn't really an outline. It was a timeline. Usually that's not the way I write. But in this case, because I had the structure that way, where it was the two women side by side, I made a big timeline of every single year that was going to be a chapter in the book and what each woman would be doing and where they would be living and which characters would be in that chapter. And I guess I felt like it was the only way to tell this story because of the sort of sliding doors element. And so you could sort of immediately see side by side how things were different, how things were the same. And I do agree with you. I love the dual narrative because I would write a chapter and then I would get to switch, and it felt like a little break and a little breath of fresh air.
Yeah, a quick question, if you don't mind, if I just jump in real quick.
Yeah, go
and
ahead.
I love the device that you use to kind of set the story going. You know, it begins in was it 1934? Is that right? Or when she's at the end of her life, and you know, we learn that both you know, the narrative, that the dual narrative part is a projection of her own mind. You know, it's inside of her, and I found that really fascinating too. More of a comment than a question, but
yeah, no, it does. The book starts and ends when Marie dies. I don't think that's a spoiler because it's about her life. But it's, you know, it sort of starts as she's on her deathbed, and it's her sort of questioning her life choices, and that's sort of the starting point for this split, to see, you know, if she had made this one different choice, how would things have been different? And then it comes back to that same scene in the end.
Right. What Nuala was saying really interested me, that, you know, our lives are, you know, biography is, I'm paraphrasing, they're not stories. You know, they're not, you know, these things that occur in our lives that are, you know, may seem accidental or occasional, you know, turn out to be the main plot points in this little structure that we create. It's fascinating. And who's that kitty up there?
Yeah, that's my cat. My son's actually on the other side of the computer. He's supposed to be the animal wrangler, but the cat has escaped him. So he's done with us now. He's gone.
Yeah.
I love this. The idea of choice is huge in your novel, Jillian.
Yeah.
And in every novel we write, it's about choice. So we choose where to shine our torch, in a sense, what part of the life. So,
Yeah.
you know, for example, Nora Barnacle traditionally has been quite smudged and sort of a little, you know, ink blot on Joyce's pages. Even when Brenda Maddox went to write her biography of Nora, Richard Ellman, Joyce's biographer, told her that there's not enough. You know, well, she ended up writing a 550-page biography of Nora. So clearly there was enough, but there's always this feeling that these women are not personally important just because they weren't, you know, a famous genius. Obviously, I'm talking about Nora here, not about
Yeah.
Marie Curie. But our business then is to, out of these choices, make what Virginia Woolf calls moments of being, you know, believable scenes, you know, emotionality, like the reasons why they made choices. So why did Marie Curie get on the train from Poland that first time? And then in the Maria section, why she didn't get on that train. And I thought you did it brilliantly. And I love that Kathy Mertz is there at the start in that prologue that is actually the end. It's a beautiful book ending of the novel and was very moving. And I think it sets you up nicely for understanding Mary. She's not a paragon of virtue. She's a brittle woman. She's work obsessed, perhaps to the neglect of her daughters. Do you want to talk a little about the two personalities and your choices around their personalities? So Marie is the scientist and Maria is more motherly and more, well, she's a frustrated mother too.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. One thing I think I was really conscious of as I was writing was thinking about the fact that, you know, sort of no matter what choices we make, no life is all good or all bad. There's some balance in there. And so I really thought about the fact that just because maybe Maria wouldn't have this big life like Marie had, maybe she could still have a good life. And what did that entail? And, you know, and I also read a lot about Marie and sort of like what her regrets were later in life. And I thought a lot about that. You know, she did experience a lot of tragedy in her life, and she was depressed, very depressed at points. And she struggled with her relationship, especially with her younger daughter, who was not interested in science at all, much to her chagrin. She got along very well with her older daughter, who was interested in science. And, you know, I sort of thought about, well, if she had made these different choices, would she have a different relationship with her child? Would she have a different relationship with science? Would she have, you know, also Marie was very, like, struggled with her fame. She really had issues with the way the press covered her, and the press sort of hounded her too. And thinking about the fact, you know, would a quiet life in a lot of ways be a better life? So I was definitely very conscious as I was writing those two storylines. What I also felt was that they were the same person. You know, they ended up being different because these choices, but they were very much the same person. I felt that even though Maria didn't go to Paris and wasn't educated at the Sorbonne, she would still want to educate herself, and she would still, you know, be drawn to science. And so I really made sure I found a way for her to do that, even though she didn't have the opportunities that Marie had moving to France and having the education and having the resources. So I felt it was a really interesting exercise as a writer to be writing about what I felt was the same person, but they were actually different characters, especially as more time went on.
I don't know about you, Nuala, but I was really fascinated with the whole flying university, you know, the underground education.
Yeah, so the real Marie and her sister, when they were young women in Poland, they attended what was called a flying university. And it was because they never met in the same place more than once, because women weren't allowed to be educated. They weren't allowed to have a higher education. So these women sort of found this underground university where they would just, you know, go to people's homes, and they would move locations, and they would teach each other. And so that plays a role. I fictionalize it a little bit in the fictional Maria story, because I was really fascinated with that too. And I think what really drew me to this story was thinking about what life was like for women at the time, and the fact that even when women didn't have opportunity, you know, these women found opportunity and made sure they had opportunity. And that was really inspiring, I think. yeah, but I was really drawn to that as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, I felt the Polish parts, I've never been to Poland, and the Polish parts really came alive to me. They were very, very rich in detail, I felt, and I could feel the oppression from, you know, what was happening with the state, Russian rule, and the lack of education for women and stuff. There was so much more freedom in Paris for
Yeah.
Marie, and then in the Maria part, you have it's her sisters who are successful in
Yeah.
Paris.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a residency in the Centre Culturel in Paris, which is it's an Irish institution in Paris, and I finished writing my novel there, and it was literally around the corner from the Marie Curie Museum, so I went there, and it was fascinating. Her lab obviously is sealed off because it's dangerous, you know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you can look in through the plate glass at her lab, and you can see her clothing. There's, you know, there's a mannequin with clothing on it that belonged to Marie. So it's really fascinating. So I could really sort of see the ground she walked. And when she talked about being obsessed with her lab, I knew where she was going. So that was really nice.
That's amazing, because I did not get to go there when I was writing the book. So I really want to. But yeah, all of her papers are in lead lined boxes because they're still radioactive and will be for about another 1,500 years, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing we sort of emailed about this a little bit that I was really fascinated by was the fact that both of our women were living in Paris at the same time. You know, we're writing in the same time period in the same city, but their lives were so very different. And so, like, maybe talk a little bit about. I'm fascinated by the fact that you finished writing the novel in Paris. So how did you use that to sort of draw out Nora's experience in Paris, I guess?
Yeah, when they got to Paris, it was just before Ulysses was published, and that's when Joyce became famous. So that's 1922. So they moved there, I think it was 1920, and they borrowed flats as usual. And then their affluence grew, mainly because Joyce found sponsors, wonderful women like Harriet Weaver and Sylvia Beach, who sponsored him. And so suddenly they had more money. Nora loved style, Jim loved style as well. And so they began to dress really well. And then they began to eat they always had high taste in terms of restaurants. So they would eat in beautiful places. So I basically spent my month, I would write every morning. And then in the afternoon, I went walking around Paris, and they lived in areas near the Eiffel Tower, very residential. They were a family, so they had family needs as opposed to left bank needs. They were also a little bit older than the lost generation people. They were older and they had teenage children. And so they were more interested in kind of Jim doing his job, which was writing, and Nora keeping house in a sense and socializing. You know, she loved to throw tea parties and things like that. She loved to have people around, and they always had a piano. No matter how poor they were, they hired a piano and they would sing together. So yeah, I personally love to walk the ground of my novels, and so I make sure that I get to the places. So I went to Trieste and Zurich as well, where the Joyces also lived. But the month residency was a godsend, you know. I mean, I was so pleased to get that, because you live in the left bank of Paris for a month in this beautiful old building, and you know, you have your bed and your brekkie, and then you just feed yourself and you get a small stipend. So yeah, that was brilliant. The Joyces lived at 19 addresses in Paris, so I did a lot of trotting around. It was wonderful. I mean, Paris hasn't changed that much. It was designed, you know, essentially by Haussmann, the boulevards.
Yeah.
And so it looks pretty much like it looked back then.
Yeah.
They're good for preservation.
That's amazing. That must have been an amazing thing to do.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
It's funny, a year ago, over Christmas, right before the pandemic, my wife and I went to London and Paris, and we got some super cheap package because it was over the winter. And, you know, of course, I had to go to Shakespeare and Company, make a pilgrimage there, and, you know, where everything happened, and just a fascinating place to be.
It's the shop is beautiful, but of course it's changed location. It was on a different street in Joyce's day, but yeah, and it's super busy now with its little cafe and stuff. But it's every writer and book lover I know who goes to Paris makes a pilgrimage to Shakespeare. It's gorgeous, you know.
Sure. I was going to ask you quickly, Nuala. You know, you mentioned, you know, Richard Ellman and the Maddox books. Have you read? I mean, Edna O'Brien is such a hero Have you read this small little, wonderful little book on James Joyce that she
Oh,
did?
yes, I have. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
It's
terrific.
beautiful. It's a lyrical sort of look at their relationship, that one. Oh, there's two.
Right.
She has one that's just about Nora and Jim, and she has one that's just about Jim. Yes, I have read them. I read as many of the biographies as I could stand to read over the course of a few years. So I read the main ones, and then I read, there's some obscure ones as well. Like there's a little biography of Nora that's based on the film that Ewan McGregor did, and with Pat Murphy and Jerry Stembridge. And then there's another Nora book written by a priest here in Galway. And, you know, everything you read will give you some other perspective, some different sort of angle to look at things. And then you go and make up your own mind anyway. You're designing people when you're writing biofiction in a sense, or you're breathing life into them. And I suppose one place maybe that I diverged from other people was in terms of Nora and Lucia, because Nora has been demonized for not caring enough about Lucia. This has always been the narrative. And I refuse to believe that narrative as a mother. I think she cared deeply for Lucia, but I think she was quicker to acknowledge than James Joyce that Lucia needed real help, like real, you know, she possibly needed to be institutionalized earlier than she was. You know, but it was actually Giorgio who first brought Lucia to an asylum, but it doesn't suit the anti-Nora narrative to say that, because, you know, it's easier to demonize her. Like, she was told by the doctors to stay away at one point because she excited Lucia. But, you know, when Giorgio and Joyce visited Lucia when she was incarcerated in Ivry, you know, she jumped at them and tried to strangle them. So they excited her too, but, you know, again, it doesn't suit the narrative. I think James Joyce, they were a very tight family, and there was an awful lot of love
But that would be fun
between
to
them.
show. Can you all see that? Yeah, some great pictures of the.
You know, Joyce was determined almost to find a cure for Lucia that possibly could not be found, given that, you know, psychiatric treatments weren't terribly advanced there. Are they advanced now? You know, it's hard to say. And it's hard to know if Lucia really did have schizophrenia. She had a lot of different issues. You know, some of it was like truancy. She would disappear for days on end. Some of it was violence. Some of it was a tendency towards, well, what would you say? She would go out without underwear and tell people she wasn't wearing underwear. She would go to pubs alone, which was unheard of for women. She, you know, would set fires in her bedroom, this kind of thing. So she had a lot of different things, mental problems going on.
Is that your average teenager these days?
No, not mine. Mine are as quiet as mice. Yeah, no, it's.
Well, I was just going to ask, can you talk a little bit, just for the people who are watching, about who may not be familiar, you know, with Nora Barnacle? You know, she comes from Galway, and the way you chose to tell the story, you know, as Jillian was saying, was much more of a, you know, linear progression in a way. But can you kind of tell us where the book opens? And I thought it was really interesting. You know, Joyce came from sort of, we talked about class and status at the beginning, and she came from what would be considered a different class to Jim, correct?
Yeah.
And you know, he was very much the artiste, but he, you know, from early on, you know, he said, Nora, you are Ireland. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the book opens in 1904, and it's their fateful meeting in June in 1904. But Nora has recently, 6 months before she had left Galway, she had ran away basically because her uncle beat her for going out with a Protestant boy. She was a Catholic, and she just wanted to get away from Galway. So she went to Dublin, quickly found work because she had been working for 8 years already. It was normal in Ireland to leave school at the age of 12. Right up until the 60s, unless your family had money, you left school at the age of 12. So Nora was educated to the age of 12, like most people. Joyce, on the other hand, came from a reasonably genteel, well-to-do family who were now falling on hard times, basically because his father drank their money away. But so Joyce was educated. He went to Clongowes Wood and Belvedere College, which are two of the poshest boys' schools in Ireland. And he also went to UCD and took a degree, and he also had studied in Paris for a while. So they were from educationally quite different backgrounds. Class-wise, Nora's father was a baker, but she was brought up by her granny because, again, a very common practice in Ireland to foster children out. Nora was sent to her granny around the age of 5 because her mother had twins. Her mother had 8 children in total and eventually separated from her husband, actually quite early on separated. So there was a lot, but because Joyce's family had fallen on hard times, they both knew poverty, which actually helped them when they went away, because often, until, as I say, Ulysses made Joyce's name hugely, they had no money. So they knew how to get by on very little money, though they were both quite profligate, and Joyce was a great man for borrowing money from people that they would never see again. But they complemented each other. They were she was water to his fire. They were a great pairing, 2 Catholics, both very sensual, both loved style, both from port towns. They got along. They loved singing. They loved words. Nora was a great storyteller. Like Joyce, when he saw her first, thought, wow, she's gorgeous. She had long auburn hair. Apparently she had a very erect carriage. She was very stylish and attractive. And then as soon as she opened her mouth and her beautiful name, Nora Barnacle, he was obsessed with Ibsen. So the Nora alone would have snared him. But yeah, they hit it off straight away, even though ostensibly you could say they were very different. They had what each other needed. They were very yin and yang. She was very earthy, calm, generous, naturally optimistic. He was more of a worrier, more sensitive, less able for people. He found people quite tricky, and obviously he drank a lot too, which she had to negotiate and deal with and scold him for.
But she had one thing that comes across, and I'm sure Jillian, you'd agree, is that she has just unwavering faith in his talent and his genius.
I guess she only had to listen to him talk to know that he knew a lot and that he had great abilities. I mean, when you read Dubliners and realize it's the work of a man in his late teens, early 20s, it's astonishing. He really was gifted. And he knew it, but that's okay. You can know it maybe if you're that gifted. They both had a natural confidence wherever they got it from. Each of them had a confidence in themselves that stood them well, through all their endeavors. And I think that's nice. Maybe where they fell down was in their parenting style. It was a bit benign neglect. They uprooted the children so often. The children had no roots. They were living between 4 or 5 different languages, so maybe their lifestyle was bad for the children. I don't like saying that because I don't like criticizing anybody for their parenting choices. It's a difficult thing to do, but Lucia and Giorgio, neither of them thrived, and you do have to look at that and question why.
Well, you think of like the hippie dippy parents of our parents' generation. I'm sure we all had friends who whose parents lived in a commune somewhere, or it was no
not in Ireland, no. Nowadays,
yeah,
but not then, no.
Yeah, but that I was born in 1969, so a lot of my friends when I was growing up seemed to have, at least there were a few. I'm not saying that I came from a weird commune or something, but there were always some flaky parents in the background that were real hippie type parents, and but they were bohemians. I mean, the Joyces, they were artists.
Well, he was. She was.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they kind of by the time they got to Paris, they were more bourgeois, really. They were kind of looking down their nose at the bohemians, at the Americans. They found them very loose with their morals. They still had a kind of a square Catholicism ethos that they couldn't get out from under. It's very difficult to get out from under that, and they would look down their noses a bit at the carry on of the Hemingways and the what's the name of the women, the rich women, Guggenheims.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But one of the things, and then we'll go back to Jillian, but one of the things I wanted to ask you was that there is this sort of, the way that you told the story, first person from Nora's perspective, I thought was magical. And you really get a sense of this kind of roguishness inside of her as well. I mean, there's some very frank, sexual descriptions. As you say, they were both sensualists. And I really enjoyed kind of getting a glimpse into her mind. What do you think, Jillian? Did you have that same reaction?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, I felt like Nuala's writing is so beautiful. It's like there was a poetry to it. And then you also, you wrote a piece, I think it was in the Paris Review, talking about the letters. I mean, I don't want to give any spoilers for the book, but I mean, I did get to the letters, and then I actually did stop and like look up to see if they were real. I don't know if you want to talk about that or not, but your piece in the Paris Review is beautiful also, if people want to read that too.
Yeah, the letters are real. I mean, I had to rewrite. Nora's part of the correspondence is missing, but I had to
Yeah,
rewrite.
that's what I thought was fascinating. Yeah.
I had to rewrite Jim's because they're still in copyright, and I didn't want to get into copyright
Yeah.
wrangles with Stephen Joyce, their last remaining direct descendant, who was still alive. He actually died in January 21. So yeah, I rewrote Jim's letters very closely mimicking what he said. Yeah, very enjoyable. I mean, people know about the letters, they're famous, and so when they're there, you can't ignore them. And it was very important for me that they were in it, because Joyce and Nora had such a strong erotic bond, especially early in their relationship. It bound them very tightly together at the start. Yeah, and her voice, I mean, that was the project. The project was to bring Nora front and center, and so it was never going to be anything but her voice. And I love a first person voice or a second person voice. That's where I'm most comfortable as a writer. And I like to inhabit these characters, almost to become them. And I want the reader then, that's my aim, for the reader to inhabit the character and feel along with them. So I hope by doing that there's an atmosphere created whereby you begin to love Nora the way I love her, and that you're carried along with her.
One of the questions that's kind of come in, which is actually good for both of you, is what was the most surprising thing that you found out when you were researching your protagonists?
I found so many surprising things. I think one that is really interesting, I think, was about Marie's relationship with her daughters, the real Marie. And one of the things that I love the best was that she went back to work back to the lab almost immediately after her oldest was born, and her father-in-law actually stayed at home with her daughter. And then after the younger daughter was born, he did too. And if you think about that from our time, that doesn't really seem like it's anything unique, but to think about that in like 1905, where she went back to the lab, and her father-in-law, who was a doctor, he had retired at that point, was the one sort of tasked with the childcare. I mean, I loved that she pushed the boundary for the time and was able to do that. But I mean, gosh, there's so many surprising things about Marie Curie. Another one was that when she won her second Nobel Prize in 1911, she was actually going through this enormous personal scandal at the time that was playing out in the press, which I won't tell you what it is because it's in the book. But the Nobel Committee actually asked her not to come to Sweden to accept the prize because they were afraid of bad press. And she said no, and she went anyway. So I thought that was also really surprising and fascinating. But there's a lot, and it's in the book, so I don't want to spoil them.
Such parallels with today, all of that thing about her being hounded by the newspaper. And,
yeah,
she says to her daughter at one point, if I were a man, they would not be interested in my private life, and I really felt,
right.
God.
I know, it's true, and it's still true. That's the thing.
What's interesting too is that there's a riff in here, obviously, about the women in science, and even today, it's like, my wife is a math and science teacher, and she studied physics, at the local university, and she graduated 15 years ago or so, but she was like the token female in the physics department, even now,
Yeah.
And so one of the things that she tries to do, she teaches at it's kind of an artsy fartsy high school for kids. And so they're all painters and artists, and she's trying to teach them science. But, she's really interested in trying to be a good role model for women, young women, to get into the sciences. It's amazing how these attitudes still persist to this day.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was also when you look at what Marie struggled with, and then to see that women are still struggling with that, it's amazing to see how much she accomplished, but then, also sad to see how little has changed. And she was the only woman in her chemistry and physics classes. She graduated at the top of her class, but she used to get mad because the men would talk about the fact that she had pretty hair, and she didn't want anyone talking about her hair. She wanted people to be talking about science with her. And she actually, Pierre had to propose to her 3 times before she said yes. Even though she was in love with him, she didn't want to get married. She had things she wanted to do. She only agreed to marry him when he told her he would move to Poland with her, and he would give up science and just teach French in Poland, because that was her plan. She wanted to move back to Poland. But then the job she thought she was going to get in Poland, they wrote her a letter and said that they weren't going to hire her for it because she was a woman. So it's just sort of this continual thing in her life. And she kept pushing back, and she still was successful, which was amazing.
Here's an interesting idea. What if Marie Curie meets James Joyce in Paris, marries Joyce, and then Nora marries Pierre?
I was thinking about, when I was reading Nora, I was like, what if they walked by each other on the street? I mean, they were in Paris at the same time, living these very different lives, but they were both existing in the same city. And I did keep thinking about that, Nola.
Well, absolutely, they would have known of each other because they were both famous. She for her Nobel Prize in scientific work, and he for his writing. So they would definitely have known of each other and who each other were, which is kind of gorgeous when you think about it. I really don't know anything about science, and I asked you when we were emailing about your relationship with science, because the radium and it's kind of terrifying and luminous in your book, and I believed all of what you wrote about and everything. So can you talk a bit about your own relationship with science?
Yeah, I know. And I'm thank you for saying that. I'm glad that you enjoyed that. I don't have a relationship with science. I mean, I was sort of almost scared away from the book, because I have to say chemistry was my least favorite subject in high school. But what brought me into it and made me feel I could do it was the fact that Marie's youngest daughter, Eve, became a writer, and she wrote a biography about her mother. And I read her biography first. And so reading sort of her writer's perspective of her mother and her mother's science gave me a window into it that I could understand. I'm not a scientist, but she wasn't a scientist either, but I was still able to understand the way she described it. And that sort of made me feel like I could do it. But I definitely, I did have to go out of my comfort zone to learn a little bit about the science. That's not normally something I would do. And I realized I understood it more as an adult than I did in high school. I don't know, maybe I just had a bad high school chemistry experience. But I was really drawn to it. And the idea of the radium, at the time, nobody understood it. They didn't understand that it was dangerous. Pierre was sick for many years, and nobody could figure out why. He would go to doctor after doctor, and Marie's older sister, who became a doctor, would suggest, well, maybe it's something in the lab. And Marie was just adamant that it could not be the radium. The radium was perfectly safe. I mean, at the time, they were putting radium in toothpaste because they thought it was like amazing for you. Nobody really knew. So I was really drawn to that and fascinated by that, and thinking about the fact that she discovered this. She had a radium tube on her nightstand that Pierre made for her that was just like a little nightlight. I know. I'm thinking about the fact that they had this and they didn't know about it, what we know today. And so I felt really drawn to write about that. You know, I was definitely nervous about writing about the science because it's not my area of specialty, but hopefully I pulled it off. And I also think very much, even though Marie was a scientist, I don't feel it's a book about science. I mean, there is some science in it, but I feel it's very much a book about like, you know, being a woman and achieving in this male dominated world and being a mother and being a sister. And it's about class and gender and more than it is about science.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I loved that in it as well. And I love that Marie is quite a spiky individual. You didn't try and fluffy her up for anybody.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important when you're writing people. We're all quite, you know, strange and spiky, and we all have our weird little tendencies. But,
Yeah.
you know, there's a great quote from the Irish writer Anne Enright, and she talks about how, you know, male characters, if they're unpleasant, you know, that's fine, that is the story. Whereas if women characters in a story are not likable, so-called, it makes the whole story unpleasant. I'm paraphrasing. What's your thoughts, Jillian, on this business of likable so-called characters? And, you know, sometimes you get reviews and the reviewer clearly hasn't liked the character, but and that turns them off, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have to say, I have already seen seen a review where somebody was like, Marie's not very likable. But I think, you know, what makes somebody likable? I think she had this amazing mind and she was very driven and she had good qualities and she had bad qualities. And I hope that I'm able to sort of get that across. And like you said, I think we're all like that. You know, we're not you know, we're not all perfect or all bad. And Marie especially, I think, does exhibit some sort of prickly qualities, but she sort of needed to get where she got. But I know I do think that there is sort of a tendency in fiction that women need to be likable. But I liked Marie a lot when I was writing her. I mean, and I liked her for her perseverance and for her drive. And did I always agree with all of her choices? You know, I didn't, but that made her really interesting to me. And it sort of gave me a window into her as a person. And, you know, I've been sort of like reluctant to talk about the tragedies that she faced because they're in their book and they're plot points, but she did have this really tragic thing happen to her sort of at the height of her career. And the fact that she was able to overcome that and keep going, I mean, that made her extremely likable to me. So I don't know. I mean, what do you think about that? Because I think you could probably say the same, you know, the same thing for Nora. She has her sort of like, you know, ups and downs as a character as well.
But I really, yes. And what I really enjoyed was that, you know, when Marie does suffer tragedies, and it's not just her sisters as well go through terrible times, like really unfair tragedy. It's just like,
Yeah.
oh, come on, you know.
I know.
And that at some point Marie just says, yeah, I just want to give up. And I think we've all felt that sometimes when bad news becomes relentless, it's extremely difficult to deal with. And I loved that you left her in there, because I think it's important to leave these things to show that people are not and don't always have to be this tower of strength. Yes, she got through, but, you know,
yeah,
by some miracle she got through, you know. And she did seem to have a good support system, which was excellent. Her sisters, you were excellent. Yes, I don't believe in making super nice versions of my characters. I don't see any need for it. And like I often get, particularly from book bloggers, oh, I didn't like her, you know, about my characters. But like I am personally an empath, so I tend to like flawed people who are struggling, because I recognize so much of myself in them.
Absolutely.
And I really object to this business of readers wanting characters to be eternally lovable and making, you know, clever choices, because none of us, literally none of us, are like that. We all make horrible choices and horrible mistakes and do bad and wrong things, and it doesn't make us it's actually what makes us human. It doesn't make us less human, you know. And I just loved the humanity of your characters. I absolutely fell in love with Pierre, you know. I just thought he was wonderful in both sections. And, you know, yeah, I won't say anything more, but yeah, gosh, Pierre, loved him.
Yeah,
I
who
did
wants
too.
who wants
I think
to
I fell in love with him a little bit too.
did you?
Yeah.
Well, that's I mean, who wants to read about, you know, well-adjusted people making good positive choices? I mean, where's the book? You know, where's the drama there?
Yeah, exactly. Where's the push?
Yeah. Well, Nuala, as you know, since you're in Galway, were you are there any descendants of the Barnacles or Norris family anyway still in that area?
There are, for sure. I haven't even tried to connect into them. You know, there's a certain audacity in taking on characters like James Joyce and Nora Barnacle and Marie Curie. And I think, and Emily Dickinson, who I've written about, and presumably Margot Frank, you're taking on people who have attained a certain level of iconic status. And, you know, historians particularly shudder, and academics definitely shudder when they hear what you're doing. But you as the writer have to put all of that aside very quickly. And I think for me, the time when I put that aside is when I have the fear. I have the, oh God, they're going to slaughter me now for tackling Joyce. And then once I'm sort of maybe 3 days into the research, I forget all about the audacity and the largeness of the fame and the what are they going to say. And I forget about the family, crucially, and I just go for it. Because if you kept academics on this shoulder and family on that shoulder and, you know, whoever on your other, you know, you'd never write what you want to write. And like, I don't know if you're the same, Jillian, but my subjects really have to interest me. I really have to be in love or falling in love to bother spending 1 or 2 years with them, because it's a large commitment, and it's not just 1 or 2 years. It might take you 1 or 2 years to write the book, then you might have 1 or 2 years of editing and preparing for publication. So generally it's a long stretch of time you're going to be with these people, talking about these people. So you really have to have a lot of faith in what you're doing and a lot of love for I mean, I hate calling them characters now because they're people. I tend to write about real people a lot. So for your people, you know, audacity be damned. We'll just do what we want to do because this is our business. Our business is fiction, not history.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I definitely have to be in love with the people that I'm writing about to stick with it. And I think I have that fear initially. It's like, oh my gosh, this is a real person. What am I doing? Then I write the book and I forget all about it. And then it comes back to me again when the book is done. I don't know if that returns to you.
100%.
Yeah. And I've written about real people a few times, and every time I do it, I think I shouldn't do this. This is so stressful. But then I come back to it again and again, because I also think, you know, we are writing fiction. I'm very clearly saying I'm writing fiction. I'm not a historian, but I do think that there is just like a value to readers who come to fiction who wouldn't come to nonfiction, sort of learning about these people in a different way and understanding their lives in a different way. And I like that as a reader. I love to read, you know, books like Nora that are biofiction. And I will come to that in a novel in a way I won't in nonfiction.
Me too. But isn't it funny, though, that people always want to quiz you about what's true and what's not true? I get these what's true and what's not true questions all the time. And it's like,
I have a pretty extensive author's note in the back of and you have an author's note in yours too, for that reason, but I do get those questions a lot too.
yeah, like you feel like saying, well, I've given you a person with a whole personality. Go and Google the facts if you're that desperate for them, you know? Like after the Emily Dickinson book, loads of people wanted to know, was she gay, you know? It's like, well, make up your own mind, do some reading.
But I also think it's a really big compliment when people ask you that, because then you've piqued their interest. And I find when I'm reading a book and then I immediately Google when I'm finished, which I did with Nora, then that means that you've brought me into this world and I want to know more.
Yeah, no, that's true. I do the exact same. I mean, but it's kind of curious that people want to pick through the scenes almost and ask, well, is that bit true and is that bit true? And a lot of it is you just taking a tiny snippet that I sometimes forget was a real thing and then fleshing it out.
Mhm.
Often my facts and my fiction blend. And when I go back to sort of research for these type of events, I go, oh, I'd forgotten that was a true thing. I thought I'd made that up, you know,
Yeah,
because
I do
again,
that.
there's that long stretch of time of research, writing, and the whole thing becomes this kind of soup, and you sort of feel like you've made all of the soup, but actually you haven't. Some of
Yeah.
the ingredients belong to other people. But yeah, it's just an incredibly enjoyable process, I have to say. I love the uncovering of facts that I can then fictionalize, particularly when they're juicy, you know.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Is there any are there any recordings of Nora speaking that you're aware of?
No. And there's only really one of Joyce, and it's him reading part of Ulysses. There may be one other.
I've
And he
heard
has
that.
this
Yeah.
very Yeatsian, beating, kind of posh, you know, almost Anglo-Irish voice in it, which I cannot believe is what he sounded like when he was sitting on the bed calling her over to him or whatever.
Lucine. Yeah, I love their language that they had for each other, and the way the intimate way they spoke with each other. I thought that was really well done.
Thank you.
For both of you, just a quick question. Were there any kind of novels that approach similar themes of recreating lives that inspired you both?
Well, I'm a sucker for these kind of books anyway. So like I've read, I loved Mrs. Hemingway. It was the Four Hemingway Wives. You know, I've read books. I've read The Lacuna by Barbara Kingsolver, which was about Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera.
Right.
I would naturally be drawn towards these books anyway. I've read Hilary Mantel. Obviously, she's like my goddess heroine. I love Hilary. I love everything she says about writing. She's so wise and clever. Yeah, they wouldn't have directly inspired this because I've been kind of doing this kind of work for the last, I suppose, 8 years or something. But yeah, I am just generally drawn to these kinds of novels. So I'm always interested in them. And, you know, I didn't know a lot about Marie Curie, and I loved reading Jillian's novel. I feel like I know her now and I care for her. You know, I feel sort of she's in my little cohort of cherished women now. You know, I always had good feelings towards her, but now I kind of
Yeah.
love her, you know. And I
Yeah.
think if we can do that with these women and make them as important as the men that they worked beside or lived beside, well, then we've done our job well.
Yeah, you put that perfectly. You know, I totally agree with that. And I'm sort of drawn to those books as a reader too. I can't think of one that is like a sliding doors one like I did, but I am always sort of drawn to reading the what if books, either, you know, historical or contemporary. I mean, I think the most recent book I read was Una Out of Order, which is nothing like this book, but it also sort of has a what if premise, like what if a woman lived her life out of order? And I'm always sort of drawn to that what if, and I find myself gravitating to that as a reader as well.
That's brilliant, because that's like an extra dimension to biofiction. You know, I've been writing these very straightforward ones, almost afraid to deviate. You know, I think there's a lot of debate around biofiction, and people have very set and very different ideas about what it is and what it should be. And
Yeah.
I think, well, we're fiction writers, we can kind of, you know, do whatever it is that we feel like doing. And yet I find myself still very wedded to facts and chronology. And you know, you were talking about making your list of dates. That was obviously because of your structure.
Right.
But I was doing that too. I
Yeah.
have to make sure it was the right date, you know.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I get very caught up, maybe too caught up in the biography. Actually, the one I'm writing now, there isn't much of a paper trail about this woman. She's a 18th century feisty Irish woman, and because the paper trail is scant, and because the anything that I can find is so conflicting and so sort of almost silly, I feel much freer to invent.
Yeah.
I say that, and even still, I'm not veering too far. I need to kind of maybe free myself out a bit, you know, and find a different way. Like just sometimes, I don't know, sometimes like I read I read a book about Emily Dickinson, for example, and I never read them before I've written my own or while I'm writing my own. I'll read them
Right.
afterwards. And in this one, for example, she was going to taverns at night. Now, for me, knowing Emily as a person, I really firmly believe she would not have done that. So unless I did something like what you did and create an alternate life for the person, I wouldn't feel like I could do that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, and that's why I think sometimes not writing about a real person is freeing because then you do have sort of this room to invent those little things that you want to invent.
Well, my other two novels that are contemporary are basically versions of me. So I'm still using real people. Yeah.
We have just a comment from one of our readers that says, talking about Marie, Sally says, it appears her older daughter died of leukemia,
Yeah.
and Marie died of a radium-related disorder, yet Eve lived until 102.
Yes, that's true. Irene died of leukemia, and Marie died, I think, of aplastic anemia, both which were radiation connected. Eve, who never went to the lab, lived a very, very long life. Also, Irene won a Nobel Prize, and Eve did not. She was the only one in the family that did not, but her husband won a Nobel Peace Prize. So they always like to say that in all the biographies. And yeah, Eve she was a concert pianist. Then she was a war correspondent during World War II. Then she became a writer. She married an American diplomat and moved to the US. So her life really diverged, and her biography of her mother is fascinating. If anyone's interested in further reading about Marie, that was sort of my favorite research book that I read.
Do you remember the title?
I think it's called Madame Curie.
Okay.
And it's by Eve Curie.
That should be easy to find. What are you working on now, Jillian? You probably hate that question because your book comes out today.
No, I like that question because I can answer it this time. I have actually another novel coming out in January of 2022, which is called Beautiful Little Fools. And it's a reimagining of the world of The Great Gatsby, but from the women's points of view. So it's sort of like a Gatsby meets Big Little Lies. We have Daisy and Jordan and Myrtle's sister Catherine, and there's a little mystery around Gatsby's death. So that was sort of it was a much different novel to write than Half-Life because I wasn't writing about real people, but I was sort of writing from a book that already exists. So that was really, really fun. And
kind of a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern idea.
Yeah, kind of in that vein. So that's going to be out in January 2022. And it's, even though it was different, I have to say, like, thematically, I still sort of stuck with the themes of, like, women's roles and sort of women pushing against boundaries. And so you see that throughout all of my writing, even though sometimes my subjects and my time periods tend to vary.
That sounds great.
Well, maybe sounds fantastic.
Thank you.
By then, you can have you come up here in person.
I hope so. I think so. By January 2022, then yeah, hopefully.
Now, Nuala, when are you going to come out to the desert?
God, hold me back. I'd love to be there. Yeah, I love Gatsby. That sounds absolutely fascinating. What a brilliant idea. I'd love that. To be communing with Gatsby for a couple of years would be such
really fun.
Yeah.
Who's the character that you referenced that you're working on now?
Ooh, I haven't said actually. I'm still writing the novel, so I won't really be finished probably until the autumn. Will I say? I haven't said yet to anyone. It's actually about the
Give us a hint. Is it something that we might guess?
I don't know. Yeah, I'll just tell you. Why not? It's about the Irish pirate Anne Bonny.
Oh.
Yeah, so she was Irish and she migrated to the Carolinas and then she became a pirate in the Caribbean. So yeah, it's been really good fun to write. Wow. I'm really enjoying it. I'm dying to get back to it. Obviously, I'm on the PR trail for Nora at the moment because Nora came out in the States in January, but it comes out here in Ireland in April. So I'm just heading into a big PR thing at the moment. I'm doing a lot of stuff. So then I'll get back to the novel, please God, in May, maybe, and I'll finish it in the autumn.
Wouldn't that
Yeah.
be interesting? She turns out to be, because, William Bonney was Billy the Kid's name. Be interesting if she was Billy the Kid's mother.
Well, she's probably the wrong era, but
Yeah.
she could have. There are differing stories about whether she died young or not. I don't really care. I'm not going to go to the end of her life.
Yeah.
I'm going to do her wild years as a pirate. So yeah, it's good fun. But again, like you with the science, I know nothing about boats, so I'm desperately researching and trying to understand boats. And God, it's hard work.
You have to go to the Caribbean, right? Because you'll have to experience.
Yes, that's the plan. But look, COVID is kind of making everything weird and strange. So we'll see.
How are you doing with it in Ireland?
We're under the tightest lockdown since Christmas Eve, and sadly numbers are going back up because people are fed up and are disobeying the rules, and so it's bad. The kids are back at school now, but nothing else is opened. There's no clothing stores opened, there's no bookstores opened, there's just supermarkets open. That's it, really. Nothing else.
No pubs?
No.
Wow.
No, not since, well, I think they opened briefly last September, but no, basically haven't been open for a year.
Is the vaccine rollout happening there yet?
Yes, it's slow. Yeah.
Well, I was just noticing, I don't know if you saw it, Jillian, that the Joyce and Nora, that's the
blue painting.
Really pretty painting.
Oh, I didn't notice what that was.
It's John Nolan.
Is that Emily on your pillow?
Yes. You're very good.
Crikey. And then is that the Flatiron Building?
Yes. Oh my God.
All right, let me see what you got in your book rack here. It's funny.
This is my TBR pile. It's disgraceful. It's just growing and growing. But because I'm doing research for a novel, I don't have time to read for pleasure. I'm either reviewing a book or I'm researching. So the book pile is ludicrous, to be honest.
Well, the cover photo is just so very striking. Beautiful, and I didn't mean to impose my my lovely Joyce Images book, but what a fun thing to flip through. There's some great pictures of them both in here.
Yeah. They were photographed by very good photographers, especially in Paris, Right. I mean, obviously the candid shots are lovely, but the official portraits are beautiful as well.
Yeah. Well, let's see. No other questions. But boy, it sure has been fun to talk to you both. I appreciate you taking the hour to talk to us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and just for everybody who's watching again, this is Nuala O'Connor's brand new book, Nora. And here is Jillian Cantor's new book, Half-Life. We've been talking about this last hour. And you can buy them at your local independent bookstore, Poison Pen, ding, 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 or wherever they sell books. But thanks so much again, and congratulations, both of you, on the publication.
We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.